Hello and welcome to this session in our ETOA Snapshot series of brief insight videos. I'm Rachel Reed and I'm joined by our resident tourism stats expert, David Edwards. And today we're going to discuss sustainability and travel behaviour, whether what travellers say they will do matches what they actually do, because of course we all know that it's not always easy to carry out an intention in practice. David, I believe we are going to kick off with a survey from Expedia.
Hello, and we are indeed, Rachel. So this is a very recent study based on 1,000 interviews in each of 11 countries right around the world that Expedia did earlier in 2022, the Americas, Europe and Asia. And the study explored a whole raft of different issues relating to sustainable travel behaviour. And when asked what sustainable travel actually meant, the findings were that 69% said that it was about lessening environmental impact. So perhaps not a huge surprise, that finding. Another finding was that 90%, so 9 out of 10, said that they look for sustainable options when they are traveling, suggesting that certainly it is very much in people's minds. Now, two really interesting insights that emerged from this study. One was that 74% said that it costs too much to be more sustainable when traveling. But rather in contrast to that, the study also claims that on average, consumers are willing to pay 38% more to make their travel more sustainable. A less contentious finding, perhaps, was that there are three core pillars, and those are clarity, authenticity, and value. And they are really key criteria for consumers trying to make sustainable travel choices. So clarity is about being able to see really easily whether or not an option when making a travel choice is sustainable or not. Authenticity is about being able to trust the information that is telling you that a choice is sustainable. And value, well, that applies perhaps to any purchase of a good or service. Consumers really do want to know that they are still getting excellent value for money when they're making a sustainable travel decision. So this is what we might call stated preference. It's all about what people say, but we can also look at what people actually do, so revealed preference. And we can do that by looking at data on air travel. So the real cost of air travel has fallen by an average of 1.7% per annum across the past half century, during which time global air traffic has grown at an average annual rate of 4.4% per annum. And indeed, in the decade in the run-up to the pandemic, so 2009 to 2019, global international passenger air traffic actually doubled. Making things more contemporary, well, outbound bookings from the UK for TUI travel, so again, this is all about air travel, in summer 2022 are 11% up on their 2019 equivalent. Taking a more global perspective, we can look at IATA forecasts, and they reckon that the number of air travellers globally is set to reach a record high in 2024, some 3% above 2019 levels. So it would certainly seem as though consumers have not fallen out of love with the idea of travelling by air. So a few points to ponder for our little discussion. Point one is it easier to say what you intend to do than to do what you say you will do? Second point is, with global inflation at its highest rate for several decades across Europe, North America, and parts of Asia, will consumers really be willing to spend more to be sustainable when they're making travel choices? And the third point to ponder is a trusted and transparent mechanism for comparing the sustainability credentials of tourism providers a prerequisite for underpinning sustainable travel behaviour? So Rachel, a few points for us to discuss.
Yes, thank you, David. And I think really the bedrock of the discussion can be those three pillars that you mentioned: clarity, authenticity, and value. And in fact, we can go to the first one of the points in terms of, is it easier to say what you intend to do than actually do it? And of course, that's the first pillar, which is clarity, in that it can sometimes be very difficult to actually find out information on whether something is a sustainable choice or not, as it were. So it's actually quite hard to come by in terms of the information.
Indeed. So I think there's a gradual growth in that information being made available to consumers when they are making choices, particularly perhaps when they're choosing things online on comparison sites. So there are a few sites where you can see, if you've got a choice of airlines, whether or not one airline is using an aircraft which is quote unquote greener than the other airline. So it's starting to creep into the decision making, but clearly it's not just about the transportation. There are many other dimensions to making sustainable travel choices, and that clarity isn't there yet across the whole consumer dimension when people are choosing their holiday or short break destination.
Yes, and in fact, part of that point around clarity links into, and I would move to the third point on this points to ponder list here, is around the authenticity, and is a trusted and transparent mechanism for comparing a prerequisite. I think one of the things we've discussed in a previous snapshot session is this idea that sustainability means different things in different destinations. So it is quite difficult and a real challenge for the industry to have a universal measurement for sustainability.
Indeed, that's right. And there are lots of different touch points that consumers will have ahead of actually getting their credit card out and booking their trip. And in a sense, they need to be provided with consistent information on sustainability, however it is being defined, when they are effectively being marketed to by a destination, but equally when they are being marketed to by a transport carrier or a hotel group. So there are many, many different players within the sphere of sustainability in relation to travel. And at the moment, there isn't perhaps a consistent framework for consumers to be able to compare and contrast which choices they are making and what the implications that those choices might have in relation to, yes, environmental issues, but also taking sustainability in a broader sense. Well, what is this doing for local economies? What is this doing in relation to local communities? So it's not just about environment, although that is obviously a very important element of the whole debate.
Yes, I think so. And I mean, even David, let's project ourselves into the future and assume that consumers do have both clarity and authenticity. And moving on to kind of the value aspect, even if people did have this reliable, authentic information at their fingertips, would they necessarily go for it? And as you're pointing out in your middle point there about global inflation at its highest rate for several decades, will people be actually willing to go, okay, I know this is better, am I willing to pay for that? I mean, I'd say I've got two things about that. It's obviously that is one of the questions, but also, I mean, there is a general view overall that anything sustainable costs more. And I do wonder whether that has to be the case, or whether we might get to a place where the sustainable option isn't necessarily more expensive.
Indeed, and in a sense, as businesses will be required to adopt more sustainable practices through things such as net zero, which is a mechanism in many, many countries now, perhaps there will be less differentiation between the options that are available, because more and more businesses will need to demonstrate that they are operating in a sustainable fashion purely to be able to trade. But certainly that transparency needs to be there. And maybe one of the ways that we're moving towards is that the impacts can be almost internalized into the costs that people are paying, such that you don't have to compare and contrast. You just know that the environmental impact that your trip will have is in fact embedded within the price that you are paying. But I think we're quite a long way from that point at present.
Yes, indeed. There's more work to be done, but I think on the plus side, there are a lot of people and businesses willing to do that. So let's see what happens in the future. David, thank you very much for that. I would just mention that the survey that David references from Expedia is available on our Insight Hub, etoa.org/insight. So do take a look. You can download it from there, and you can find many other pieces of research available by category on there as well. So for today, I say thank you for listening, and thank you to David.
Thank you.
Goodbye.